Welcome to the Plane Hoppers Guild.
Greetings, adventurers, explorers, treasure seekers, and sellswords. Welcome to the Plane Hoppers Guild. I'm Journeyman Eric.
And I am Dungeon Lord Jay.
And we're here to talk about D&D.
All right. I'm very, very excited to talk about what I have planned this episode.
Absolutely. And we actually have a few other topics to talk about. Jay, you have a very exciting announcement, don't you?
I do. So I have been working on an actual play, a professionally produced actual play podcast. It's called Quest, Dungeons and Dragons podcast. And I would really just appreciate it if everyone who listens to this went and checked it out. It's professionally produced. It's recorded in a studio, and it is awesome.
And episode 1 is currently out.
And episode 2 is coming this coming week.
Oh, we should say, what is the campaign you're running for Quest?
So I am running Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Not sure if anyone is familiar, but it's like a mystery urban adventure. Really good stuff. I have great funny. It's comedy sort of thing. It's funny players. You've checked it out, Eric?
Oh yeah. It's an edited down long play. It's about 30 minutes long, with sound effects, really nice professional editing. It is awesome. I am eagerly awaiting episode 2.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Well, I am also very excited to talk about our topic for today. Are you ready?
I have been waiting for this since the last episode.
Okay. So today, I wanted to talk about this concept, this technique that I swear by. I use it in almost every adventure I write, or at least keep it in the back of my mind. It's called the 5-room dungeon design. It comes from a website called roleplayingtips.com. So, the 5-room dungeon design is a simple framework for a single session of play that includes all 3 pillars of play. You recall the 3 pillars of play, right, Eric?
Yes. Roleplay, exploration, and combat.
That's right. And it's designed to fill a 3 or so hour play session, so it's perfect for one-shots. It can also be used for standalone dungeons or adventures or long-term campaigns. It's perfect and beautiful. I love it. The 5-room dungeon design is not only a layout for a dungeon, but it's a story structure. And I have in big, bold letters right here, 5-room dungeons are not just dungeons. 5 rooms in the 5-room dungeon act as events, quote unquote, or encounters, quote unquote. We talked about encounters last episode when we were talking about session prep.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5-room dungeon design is a template or a framework for a story. It's story beats. It could work for a dungeon with 5 or more rooms. You know, it could work with a dungeon with 3 rooms. It could work for wilderness exploration. It could work for mystery adventure or a heist or an urban adventure. It's got endless possibilities, and it is not genre specific or system specific or setting specific. None of that really matters. You can use it in a Star Wars game. You can use it in a Pathfinder game. It still works.
This might be a more esoteric question, but what problem does the 5-room dungeon design set out to solve?
The 5-room dungeon design is meant to mimic the heroic chronicle or heroic story structure. You've heard of that before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's supposed to mimic it, not exactly, but it gives you the same sort of story beats. It sets out to help guide a dungeon master in creating a well-balanced session.
Ooh, very handy.
So, like I said before, the 5-room dungeon are not necessarily 5 rooms. They are 5 story beats. And if you are going to set out making a 5-room dungeon, the first thing that you need to do is establish a theme and a goal. So the thing about 5-room dungeons that it does best is it reinforces theme. So to design a 5-room dungeon, you must first have to decide what the goal is that the players need to accomplish and how you thematically wish to convey the challenges that they need to face to achieve that goal. So a heist is a way different theme than a horror game. And knowing you want to convey and knowing what theme you want to convey is an important aspect of just design in general. But before you start a 5-room dungeon, you need 2 things, a goal and a theme. So a goal could be a MacGuffin. It's a rescue mission. You could be stopping a necromancer's ritual, right? The possibilities are endless. The theme could be like a wizard's tower, right? Magical miscellany, a jungle shrine, like that kind of adventure, action pulp adventure, right? Or a bank heist. That's the theme.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, finding the murderer in a horror-themed murder mystery dinner party. That is a clear goal and a theme, and you can constantly draw from those goal and theme while you're designing the rest of the dungeon. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It would be rather disorientating if you were at said dinner party and suddenly there was like a pit trap of acid out of nowhere.
Right. So you keep with the theme, but while you have those things in your head, the goal and the theme, we can move on to room 1. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
So room 1 is the entrance and / or guardian. Okay. Room 1, entrance, guardian. The first room's goal is to set up early action and to capture player attention and to set the theme. So the guardian, quote unquote, should act as a reason why the dungeon has not been plundered before the characters get there. Or perhaps it has been plundered and the quote unquote guardian is the plunderers who are protecting their booty. It should be a brief, medium challenge combat encounter. It should tax just a couple of the PC's resources early.
Okay, so like some sort of like ancient soldier that was tasked with keeping out looters.
Exactly. And when you reinforce theme, if you want to reinforce the theme, right, like I was saying before, you need to keep theme in mind. If it's a wizard tower dungeon, the guardian could be a golem or something that reinforces the magical nature of the tower. If it's an ancient tomb, maybe it's some like undead or an animated statue. If it's a heist, it could be a brief encounter with some thugs whose unconscious bodies could be easily hidden and looted for disguises.
All right, very interesting.
Yeah, and if you don't want to have a combat, like I said, this goes for any theme or any setting or any game style. So if you're playing a different style of game, it doesn't have to be a combat. The entrance itself could be the challenge. Maybe it requires a specific passphrase, it's trapped or it's cleverly hidden, or there's an electric fence. You know, it needs to be a minor challenge to tax some of their resources. The main benefit of room 1 is giving the min-maxers or the murder hobos, the players, a chance to shine, a chance to do something. This, like all the other rooms, is an event or an encounter and can be placed anywhere, but it acts as the first story beat. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I can see it having value of kind of being like, this is the start of the dangerous area. Okay, you got to keep on your toes now because it's no longer just walking through a hallway. There's something, to be on the lookout.
Dangerous, for. Right? It keeps it gets the action going, right? It hooks in the players immediately. Nothing's better than, starting the session and say, all right, everybody roll for initiative, So now we can move on to room 2. So room 2 is the puzzle or a role play challenge. We just got everybody's blood pumping and now they're victorious against the guardian, right? Because it's a medium encounter. It should only tax a minor amount of resources. Mm-hmm. The PCs should now be challenged with a problem that cannot be solved with fighting. This will break up that action and create like good pacing. So room 2, unlike room 1, shines the limelight on a different kind of character or player. So maybe in room 1, your barbarian and your fighter got a chance to shine. Now in room 2, your bard or your wizard will get a chance to shine. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it is an extremely good tip for any aspiring DMs out there is make sure there is always something your players can do that is like their thing. You don't want to create only combat encounters or only roleplay encounters if you have players of, mixed interests.
Exactly. So when you are designing room 2, the puzzle or the roleplay challenge, you should still be trying to reinforce the theme. For example, if you're in a dungeon, it could be a magical chessboard floor tile puzzle, right? Or the standard turn the statues in the right order, Skyrim style, to unlock the door or something.
Oh yeah,
Or
classics.
Classic. Or if it's an ancient tomb, if we're going jungle tomb theme, it could be a floor covered in snakes, and all the snakes will slither away at the sight of open flame. But my favorite kind of encounter to put here is a role play encounter. So role play encounter examples could be a guard under surveillance, like in a heist. A guard under surveillance must be, bluffed or coerced without raising the alarm. Or an undercover NPC could hold important information that the PCs need to know, and they need to get it without blowing the NPC's cover. Or an NPC ghost is reliving the moments before its death and could be a source of information useful later in the adventure.
Yeah, definitely from my limited experience, this is one of the more challenging things to build out. For me, a combat encounter, there's loads of different monsters and stat blocks and a lot of resources, but creating something for roleplay is very almost character specific. It depends how your party's built up. So it's really hard to just say, plop this encounter in front of them, because it's entirely possible your players may just try and kill the other NPC immediately.
Right, that's true. That's true. You are right about that. So puzzle or roleplay challenge. You could do like both, right? It could be a talking riddle door with a bad attitude that must be convinced to give the riddle in the first place.
I like that. Snarky door.
Snarky door, yeah. So not only do you have to roleplay with the door, but then you have to solve a puzzle afterwards. And another optional thing you could do is once you figure out what you want to do with room 2, you could try to plant 1 or 2 clues in room 1 about potential solutions to puzzle room or roleplay encounter. So that's room 2. Room 1 is the guardian. Room 2 is the puzzle or the roleplay challenge. Room 3 is like so good. So room 3 is the trick or the setback. So you were saying before that room 2 might be where you struggle. Room 3 is where I struggle. Room 3 acts as a source of tension. You can do this by using a trap, a trick, or a setback. And it's harder to define what a trick or a setback is. It's more up to DM interpretation. But depending on composition, it should cater to the players or the player characters that haven't had a chance really to shine in room 1 or room 2. Or you could just give a double dose of the type of gameplay that you and your players enjoy the most, like more combat or more role playing.
Mm-hmm.
A trap fits well here to tax more of the character's resources in a more severe way than room 1 and 2. If you want to, you want to sort of tax some more of their resources here to build for a dynamic struggle in room 4, which we'll talk about in a moment. But traps could be a scythe trap, a pit trap, a trapped hallway, your classic kind of stuff.
Okay, so they've had their sort of downtime with room 2. Room 3 is kind of get them amped back up.
That's right. And if you don't like traps, like I don't really enjoy running traps, it could be a more challenging combat and more difficult than room 1. And it could be integral to the rest of the adventure, like they need to take down a key defense or just, exhaust some more of their resources or make the party more susceptible to a certain kind of attack. Examples of setbacks could be a pit trap that leads to a slide that brings the characters back to room 1, where they need to face the guardian again and do the puzzle again. That's a setback. Or the PCs rescue some hostages or prisoners after they fight somebody in room 3, and they rescue some hostages or prisoners that need immediate escort back to safety.
Ooh, that's a good one.
But my favorite is the trick. If you can pull this off, it's the best kind. An example could be the player characters find the room that the MacGuffin is supposed to be in, but it has been already stolen by another thief who won't give it up unless the players help them accomplish their goals further in the dungeon. Or an NPC companion could turn on the party. Being so close to the end, they could be like, it's mine. It was mine all along, and turn on the party. Or the prisoners that they rescue could be enemies in disguise or booby-trapped in some way.
Yeah. This might be a very dirty trick, but a setback that I really like from a couple of the campaigns I've watched is like the I guess you'd call it like the false hope. Like, oh, we found what we were looking for, but oops, it actually wasn't.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's just somebody screwing with you. And
the false tomb.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. A good example that I came up with of all three, it's a trap, a trick, and a setback, is there's a curse on a room that makes those who enter vulnerable to necrotic damage, right? And room 4, the next room, contains a necromancer that will deal necrotic damage. And the PCs need to decide before heading into room 4 if they're going to burn precious resources now, like spell slots, curing the curse, or suffering the consequences in the next room.
Yeah, that's a good one, because that, lets the players kind of decide if they're instead of just being sort of slapped with, something they can't avoid. It's now their decision. Are we going to take more damage, or are we going to be smart about this and maybe be sneaky, or
right, or something? Yes, yeah, choose your own path. Exactly. So that's room 3 is the trick or the setback, and that acts as a sort of rising tension. So room 4 is the big one. Room 4 is the climax, the boss fight, or just like the conflict. So this room is the set piece. It's the boss fight or the final challenge. This is the room where you pull out all the stops and make it as epic as possible. This is where the boss is. And it's a good tip when making a boss fight to make the terrain of the encounter interesting or a challenge in of itself. Another good tip for running a boss fight, especially in the 5-room dungeon sense, is try to begin or end the encounter with a little bit of role play, right? Maybe the boss is trying to stall for time to let like reinforcement shows up, or the boss reveals important informations that the PCs had not discovered up until that point, something like that.
The evil monologue.
Yes, just to sort of break up that rising tension of room 4, break it up a little bit with a little bit of role play, but still having that tension there before this, the release of a conflict. And maybe at the end of the combat, you could end with the bad guy bleeding out and has a few words, like to foreshadow future events, or there's helpless prisoners to role play with when the combat is over. I
know the bleeding out BBEG is a good one because players do like to boast.
Yes, they do. Boy, oh boy, do they love that. Do I love that? I'm a player. So a couple of tips for making this specific combat interesting. Previous rooms, room 3, the trick or the setback, could contain alarms or warnings to give the bad guy a chance to prepare. The lair itself, this 4th room, could be trapped, and the boss knows how to avoid the traps. The bad guy reveals that they have the MacGuffin and threatens to destroy it or put it out of reach forever. And like we discussed in making balancing combats, you could have alternate objectives. I think alternate objectives is a very important resource for a DM to have. And if you don't want to do a boss fight, you can have it be an epic multi-stage puzzle that requires the skill of all players involved, to work together or something. Like if it's a heist, you don't necessarily have a bad guy. So maybe it's just like this epic lock that all the players have to work together to get into or something like that.
Ooh, or like an Indiana Jones style timed escape or something.
Yes. Well, timed escape is the next room. We're on room 4.
Okay.
Yeah. But you're on it. You got it. So we can move on to room 5. So room 5 is the reward, revelation, or plot twist. Room 5 is the completion of the goal established in the beginning of the design process. So in room 5, whether it's a separate room or just an encounter right after the boss fight, it's a plot point, right? It doesn't have to be a whole different room. Room 5 is where you get the treasure, or you get the information you needed, or you save the princess, or whatever you were meant to do. But room 5 is also where you can let your creativity sort of shine. And it's often what makes a dungeon memorable and different from other dungeons in your campaign. You can use this time to just give out rewards, whether it was the completion of the goal or not, the MacGuffin, the treasure, magic items, valuable information, doesn't matter. But it's also the place that you could put in a plot twist or a revelation that was established in room 4 when the boss was, monologuing. A couple of examples could be in room 5, you find the MacGuffin or whatever, you complete the goal, but you also find bonus treasure that leads to an entirely different adventure, right? Or has a separate adventure or mini adventure tied into it. It could be clues and information pertaining to larger plot embedded in the treasure and reveal some key information that maybe the players didn't know about. So, maybe the necromancer spellbook has like his plot in it, right? His evil plans in it, and something else is set in motion. So it sort of ties into a larger story. But I like me a plot twist, dude. And for plot twists, we got to go for like a rival. And I do this all the time, Eric. This is my go-to move, is a rival adventuring group or bad guy or whatever appears and tries to steal the reward while the player characters are weakened after their entire dungeon fight, after room 4. So the rival shows up right after they cleared the whole dungeon, is like, give me what you got. I do this one all the time. It's literally my favorite.
Nothing would burn.
Oh man,
nothing would burn players more than somebody else trying to muscle in on.
And they'll hate that guy. They will hate that guy too, which is great, like motivation to get them to kill that person.
Yeah.
But you could also do this one's good, Eric. The whole quest was a trick, and killing the dungeon's boss furthers the main villain's grand scheme.
I can't remember if I actually managed to put one of those in on Dungeons of the Mad Mage, but that was definitely a big part of what I was planning, was sort of this like sneaky subterfuge, like messing with the players, and they think they're doing one thing, but it actually, they were helping the evil guy all along.
That's right. Good. Yes, it is good. Or I also do this one quite a lot. The race to escape. Right. So maybe the boss detonates the dungeon with his dying breath, and they have to like do a skill challenge or something to escape the dungeon as it's exploding and falling apart behind them. So we have room 1. Well, actually, step 1, establish theme and a goal. Room 1, entrance and the guardian. Room 2, puzzle or roleplay challenge. Room 3, the trick or the setback. Room 4, the climax, the boss fight. Room 5, the reward and or the plot twist. That is a 5-room dungeon.
Awesome. Excellent tips. Definitely something I am going to be using moving forward.
I use it a lot. Like every time I make something, a dungeon, a story, like a session. If you look at the session, you can implement this as just encounters, and there can be filler in between them. and maybe you could take this room out and add this room in or whatever. But the 5-room dungeon is a excellent layout for a standard D&D session, and I use it literally all the time, and it's the best piece of advice I can give a DM who's trying to write a one-shot or something. Like, I helped my oldest kid. They had a bunch of friends over, and they wanted to run a D&D game, so I helped them design a 5-room dungeon, because it can be extremely simple or extremely complicated. It doesn't matter. It's a great layout for an adventure.
Yeah, it really touches on kind of the key point of what a dungeon master does is balance. Balancing the game, balancing the players, balancing the challenge. So I can see why it pops up and it's very useful quite frequently.
Yeah, so any questions about the 5-room dungeon?
I'm interested to know, from your experience, which part of the 5-room dungeon do most people have problems with?
In my experience, it's room 3, because it's difficult to, without ham-fisting a sort of trick or a setback, like the pit trap that brings you back to the beginning of the dungeon is such a fuck you.
It is. I mean, to a certain point, some people might expect a fuck you.
Right.
But I can see that.
Right. And if you allude to it enough and you stick to the theme, then it makes sense, right?
Yeah. And it'll certainly make the players hate whoever designed it. In universe, right? No, I think that, to me, it makes total sense. I'm really glad we got to talk about this, because this has definitely put some interesting points in my mind about designing some upcoming encounters.
Oh yeah. All right, so do you want to move on to the sage advice this week?
Absolutely. So for the sage advice, I would really like to discuss session zeros and kind of preparing for campaigns.
Okay. Good topic. Session zeros are integral to any campaign, if you ask me. But up until recently, with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, it wasn't a acknowledged thing by Wizards of the Coast, by Dungeons and Dragons. Just a thing within the community.
Yeah, and considering how, at least to me, how important session zeros can be, it's really surprising that there isn't more discussion about them. There really isn't as much advice out there for new dungeon masters.
Absolutely. So I think we should start by establishing what is a session zero. What is a session zero, Eric?
A session zero for me is establishing some really key points. Recently, I had a session zero for Curse of Strahd, and the points that I made sure to discuss broadly with my players were story themes, player behavior, ethics, lines, and boundaries, gameplay and in-world universe, and character creation. Broadly boiling down to what is the story about. Curse of Strahd is about gothic horror, vampires, this oppressively malicious force over a land. This is also where we might discuss harsher topics, because, D&D can be so broad in what it covers. It can be very kid-friendly. It can cover some very extreme stuff for the sake of story.
I completely agree with your layout of a session zero. And I mean, basically, it's just a session before the session, right? That's why it's session zero. But do you remember, Eric, the first session zero we ever had? I said so time and time again, I said over and over, session zero is for blank. Session zero is for blank. Do you remember what I said it was for? It's a little phrase, 2 words. Do you remember?
I don't remember.
So, establish expectations. Do you remember now?
That makes sense.
Yes, I said it over and over and over again because these were new players, right? And I will shout that to the heavens. Session zero is for one thing and one thing only: establishing expectations. Every single thing that you do in a session zero goes back to that, right? Establishing your expectations as a DM for the players, establishing the players' expectations for their characters in the story, right? Establishing the expectations of the players. What do the players need to do? That's all that a session zero is establishing expectations. So, Eric, you did just recently run a session zero. I bore witness to it. And you went over your format, but I noticed that when you were running your session 0, because we are so close, like the players and you, we're all very, very tight knit, that it was more relaxed. It was more of a conversation than anything else. When I run a session 0, I run it a little bit different. I am very rigid. I like my structure. So when I am running a session 0, my format is very stiff. Just like how this fucking podcast has a stiff format, and so do my session 0s. I prefer it to have a more stiff format. And something that I start with that you didn't, which is fine because we're all friends and you don't need this, but it's a tip and I wanted to tell you about it. So I always ask warm-up questions. So usually when you first get on, when you first meet together, if you're in person or if you first get online, when you're online, everybody's talking about their weekend or what movies they recently watched. And what I like to do when I'm starting a session 0 is ask warm-up questions. And this is for two purposes. One, it gets everybody in the meta sort of D&D headspace, right? We're not talking about our favorite movies anymore. We're not sitting around laughing anymore. We're here to do a session 0. This is what we're here to do, right? And it gets you in that, not only thinking about D&D, but a meta sense, like my character, the story design, stuff like that. Also, if you ask the right questions, you can gauge what your players want from the game and like to engage with. So if you're not too clear on, I have a player, Will, who always presses the red button. You can put a red button in any room, anywhere. There'll be 1,000 million signs saying, don't touch, don't touch, don't touch. Although recently my brother's character did that too. But they will just touch the button no matter what. Right. So if I didn't know that, it's good to ask warm-up questions. Like for example, some of the warm-up questions I ask is, what's something you've always wanted to do in a D&D campaign? Fight a beholder. I've always wanted to fight a beholder in a D&D game, me personally. So I asked my players, what would you like to do? Always wanted to do in a D&D game. And it sort of gauges, I want a legendary sword. I want to save a princess or whatever. And that gives me ideas to work with for my campaign going forward.
I really like that tip. It wouldn't have even occurred to me to kind of ask warm-up questions, like getting people kind of get the blood flowing, get the brain juices going about D&D. I really like that. I really like that.
And when you're playing D&D, usually the recap is what does it, right? The recap gets everybody in the headspace. Or like in my game, for example, I say, who wants to do the recap? And that means we're not talking about anything anymore about TV and movies. And, my friend Brennan was in Spider-Man Homecoming. We don't need to talk about that anymore. We're talking about D&D now. But in a session 0, it's more loosey-goosey. So having something to sort of, this is where we're starting, but it's still kind of loose and fun.
Yeah, and giving the players a space where they can have their input on things. Because like you said, session 0s can be very structured with the DM leading. Maybe like you said, they have an idea, they really want to do this and this and this in a campaign. Stuff like that is very important. So that's a great idea. I'm definitely going to be stealing that.
So one more thing before we get into what you did cover. Another thing that I like to do in my session 0, even though every single guy that I play with have played with me before, I've still run many session 0s with people that I haven't played with before. I always go over my DM style. Because you're basically, when you're doing a session 0, we're going to talk about social contracts here in a minute, but you're signing a social contract that you're going to do this thing. Right. So you need to know who your boss is, who the leader of this group is. And talking about your DM style is important, in my opinion, important, right? So when we talk about my DM style, I use a lot of words like camera shot and, or like screen wipe, a bunch of cinematic terms, because I like to think of my movies to think of my games like movies. So I want to get my players in the headspace of, oh yeah, this game is not like a storybook, like a Matt Mercer thing. It's a movie. It's also a time when you're discussing your DM style to talk about what kind of plot you have. So like, for example, I like to make crazy fucking complicated plots. Like I want 12 moving pieces all at once, right? Some DMs aren't like that. They like to have one big villain and that's everything in the story ties to that one villain. I have like 10 villains, and they're all gunning for different things, and it's important to mention that when you're getting into a campaign with this dungeon master.
Since I basically have no DM style, since this is my second campaign,
You have a style. You have a style.
I think those are excellent tips, especially for dungeon masters who, like you, bring in people kind of from the outside world, because you're kind of catching people up to speed on years of creating your own voice, your own style, your own cadence to a story. So I think that is an excellent tip, is to tell people, hey, I like to be verbose. I like to describe scenes. I like to describe things like a movie. That way people can be thinking, okay, cinematic. One thing that for me personally, touched on that I thought was important was player behavior. How are players going to interact with each other and the world? Is this a serious campaign? Is this a jokey campaign? Are players going to be fighting against each other possibly? Are we going to allow deception or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so that goes under what's called the social contract. Right, so the social contract is like it's not a written agreement, but it's an agreement between people that we all agree on certain things. And again, I just want to touch it again. Establish expectations, right? Everything that you just said, establish expectations. If you are having a session 0, you want to establish what time is everybody going to show up? What kind of role are we going to do? A lot of role play? Okay, if we're doing role play, like you said, can we make deception checks against each other? What is the sort of attitude that we all need to have when we're at the table?
Create expectations. God, there's a reason you're called Dungeon Lord J. That is such a succinct way of saying this.
Yeah, it's establishing, creating expectations. It's the most important part of a session 0. So something else that you could go over, like you were saying in the social contract, is like I have a couple of ticks, like pet peeves. Right. So I have 2 major pet peeves, and if somebody's doing this on my table, we're not going to get along. And that's just my personality. And the first one is waiting for me to call for a roll before you roll. I abhor when a player rolls the dice and then says, I make a stealth check. I'm like, dude, don't fucking do that. Wait for me to tell you. You might not have even needed to roll. I'm pretty lenient as a DM. I might just give you shit, But number one is and that's a social part of the social contract. A, do not roll until I tell you to, right? And number 2 is cell phones at the table. Using your phone at the table in a distracting sort of way will drive me up a fucking wall. And that's me. That's me in life. If I'm talking to a friend in person and they're on their phone, I will stop speaking. Just because I know that I can't pay attention, and some people can, but I know that I can't pay attention when I'm staring at my phone and someone's talking to me. I expect the same respect.
No, absolutely. God, there's so many things we could talk about, but one, just to maybe keep on a couple of the bigger points that I want to talk about, definitely. Respecting player agency, I think, goes along with that.
Yes.
I know this is creating, managing expectations, but I read all these stories about how somebody rolls and, decides what somebody else's character does. I would hate for that to happen, for somebody else to say, okay, I convince your character to become a cannibal with me. What? That would just drive me batty.
That goes into the social contract for sure. Yeah. And establishing expectations. All of that's pretty straightforward stuff. But the main thing in the social contract is okay. So Eric, when we talked about yes and no topics, you called it something and I absolutely loved it. And I can't remember what you called it.
Hazy and no-go.
Okay. Can you explain that for me?
So for hazy, and these might be used in different language. For me, hazy topics would be topics that may be mentioned in passing, briefly visited for story, but no details, etc. So that might be something like violence against innocent people, like pets or elderly. I'm not going to go into detail about how the big bad evil guy kicks kittens, but you might know he kicks,
Right, he kicked the kitten.
Yeah, he kicks, the sweet little orphan boy's pet, just to be fucking evil. So hazy topics, yeah, briefly mentioned, no detail. No-go topics are a hard line. These will not be discussed. These are things that I personally don't want to see in my game, or players don't want to have in their story.
So I call that lines and veils. A veil being a hazy and a line being a no-go. But I absolutely love your name for them. So yeah,
lines and veils.
Lines and veils. Yeah, but so a veil is something. I always use the example of, on TV shows that like sitcoms, when the two people are about to have sex, it shows them like about to get hot and heavy, and then smash cuts to them in the bed with the covers on them, and they're both smoking a cigarette. Right? Mm-hmm. That's a veil. We know that something happened because we're adults, but we don't go into graphic detail about it.
Exactly.
And then a line is something that we do not do. For example, in my games, I just do not allow any sort of sexual harassment or rape or anything in that. And my reason, I say this in every session I've ever had, is Lord of the Rings is the best fantasy media ever, and there's not a single rape scene in the entire show, in the entire movie. So if they don't have that in Lord of the Rings, and it's an extremely awesome fantasy epic, I don't need it in mine.
Right. It's something that if another group wants to do it, they're adults, they can decide amongst themselves. It would just ruin anything for me. This is not something that I want to put time towards, because I just wouldn't have fun. And what's the point of D&D if it's not going to be fun?
Establishing expectations. So the next thing in a session 0 that needs to be discussed when you have a session 0 is like a campaign overview. What did you call that in your format?
That would be probably a mix between story themes and gameplay.
Yes. So campaign overview, in what I call it, in that you establish the themes of the campaign. So again, we talked about themes earlier when we were talking about 5-room dungeon, but if you're doing a horror themed game, you want everybody in the mindset of this is supposed to be scary, even though we're sitting at a table rolling dice with pencils and paper and imagining all of this. Keep in the mindset that this is supposed to be scary, right? Or a mystery, or high fantasy, whatever. Establish theme. You establish the setting. So you talk about your in-universe. What did you call it? In-game, in-universe, something?
In-world universe.
Yes, so, in-world universe. That's where you can talk about that sort of stuff too.
Yeah, so they should know, this is a medieval, European kind of country, it's been shrouded in darkness, or this is a Victorian England or whatever.
Whatever, right. Stuff. Absolutely. And then usually what I do is give a brief plot summary. I give a brief plot summary like the back of a book, where maybe it'll give the name of the big bad evil or something like that. But it gives you a general idea of what the game is about. And you do this to get the players in the mindset of creating characters that will fit into the story that the DM has chosen to tell.
Exactly, because even though the characters themselves won't know what's going on, the player should have at least a broad idea of what they're walking into.
Right. You don't want to create a sort of Sherlock Holmes-esque character in a tribal warrior themed sort of game. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah. At least not unintentionally.
Right. If you did it on purpose, you got to have some kind of reason for it. I mean, honestly, as a DM, if they were coming to me being like, "Hey, I want to be Sherlock Holmes in your war game," I'd be like, "Are you sure? Like, I don't know how well I can work that in, and we can try to work on ideas together."
Yeah, and that's one of the points in session 0 is where maybe you can try and redirect them towards something more appropriate.
Right, and that's where we get into character creation. That's the next thing that you usually do in a session 0.
Yeah, this is what I found was very useful, is just getting people together and talking. Instead of playing postmen and, sending messages back and forth, it's just sit around a table, chat about it, start bouncing ideas off of one another. Like, you guys, you had some great synergy with your characters. You started coming up with stuff, you started coming up with backstory and how you knew each other.
Yeah, well, we're a tight knit group. We are.
True, but the best way to do this is just to get people talking to each other on a call, honestly.
Yeah, it's important to get the players to discuss character ideas, but not just character ideas, but inter-character connections.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The connections between the characters, because I think it's super important to have two of these characters are friends, right? And maybe these two characters are friends. And now they're a group together. So at least each character will have one guy that's sort of like, this is my friend that I can role play off of in those first couple of sessions where the adventure hasn't really got rolling yet and you don't have a lot of character ties yet.
Yeah, it's kind of answering, I don't remember where I read this, but it was, who are these people? Why are they here? Why are they together?
Right.
Why don't they leave?
Exactly. So this is a good spot for that. Usually by session's end, the end of session 0, you should have, as a player, a good idea of who you want to be your character. Now, maybe not the personality fleshed out, maybe not the stats fleshed out, but definitely a vague character concept.
Yeah, the
pretty solid
broad
one.
strokes. For
Right.
Sure.
But in character creation, this is usually when I unload my house rules. And that you called it gameplay, right?
Yeah, this would be the leveling up stuff. Starting level, sort of like you said, house rules, critical fails and fumbles, etc. should be discussed here for sure.
Yeah, establishing whether you're rolling for stats or using point buy or standard array. Like you said,
which I forgot to do. But...
Yeah, but that's okay. One quick message, but you did talk about whether we're doing XP leveling or milestone, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is also a place that if you're one of those strict DMs, you can say what races or classes that you allow, or whether or not you allow multi-classing. I'm one of those DMs that doesn't like multi-classing in my game, which I'm a huge hypocrite about because I definitely multi-classed as my last character. But I don't like it in my game. But this is also
totally fair.
Yeah, well, what can you say? But it's also a place for you to, name off your house rules, like you're saying. Fumble tables. The house rules that I use is flanking. I'm pretty weird about my inspiration, but I have a weird inspiration system, but I'm very generous with inspiration. And I also use glancing blows, all of which are flanking, inspiration, and glancing blows are all house rules that I run in my game that they feel like regular rules at this point.
Oh, and also for any DMs out there too, this is a great place also to discuss any spell limitations you might be putting in place. Because for this specifically, there are certain survival spells that may not work the same outside of this Curse of Strahd campaign as they do inside. And I know that some dungeon masters, they will say, I don't like this spell, so I don't want to use it. So this is definitely a place to bring it up. So everybody, while they're creating characters, they're not, having to go back and redo stuff because a spell has changed or whatever.
Establish expectations, right, Eric?
Yes, establish expectations.
It's the most important thing about a session 0, man. That's that. If I could give one piece of advice, that's it. Anything else we should cover in a session 0? I feel like that's basically that I do in a session 0.
I think we discussed some excellent talking points. And like you said, if you're going to take anything away from this, is establish expectations.
Establish expectations. That's right. All right. Are you ready to get on to the bit, Eric?
Hell yes.
Dude, I'm so stoked for this one. So this is the first bit that I ever came up with for a different podcast. I am going to run it by Eric, and I'm just so excited. It's the best one I ever came up with. So I call this game Monster Mash. In this game, I am going to, each question, I'm going to name 2 monsters, just by name. Mm-hmm. One of those monsters is real, and one of those monsters I just made up. And you have to decide which one is the real one.
All right. I know D&D has some weird monsters, so okay.
It does.
I'm gonna do my best.
All right. Are you ready, Eric?
I am ready.
All right. Question 1. Death turtle or flail snail?
I'm gonna say the fake one or the real one?
You need to name the real one.
The real one. I think the flail snail is the real one.
You are correct.
Yes.
The flail snail is a real D&D monster. So the flail snail is a giant snail with 4 or 6 tentacles ending with club-like growths on the top of their heads. They have very colorful and scintillating shells that possess anti-magical properties. And they're huge. And those come to us from 1st edition AD&D, 2nd edition, and 5th edition. They are in this current edition of the game.
Wait, are they described as huge, or are they huge monster? Are they huge classification?
I think they're huge classification.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, they're giant snails with, instead of where their eye stalks would be, they're like tentacles with clubs on them.
But wait, wouldn't they really be really slow?
Yeah, yes, I guess so. The main thing about them is their scintillating shell that has anti-magic properties. They are like killed and used by like wizards for potions and spell components and stuff like that.
Oh, anti-magic, like like the Susa tree?
No, sir. Susa tree, yeah.
Tree.
Just like that.
Interesting.
Okay, so number 2. Clubber or bowler.
Oh, I'm going to say bowler.
Have you done this before? That is correct.
No.
So a bowler, which is BOWLER, bowler, is a creature that is distantly related to a mimic. It looks like a giant boulder or like a large rock.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
They have no sense organs, like no eyes, no ears, no nose. But their bodies are extremely sensitive to sounds and vibrations. They ambush their prey by rolling over them and eating the remaining paste with a tiny, teeny tiny, sharp-toothed mouth.
Jesus Christ.
Yes, and they come to us from AD&D and 2nd edition.
Wow, it's a sentient bowling ball.
Giant sentient bowling ball, yes. Fantastic. Okay, you ready for the next one?
All right, yeah, I'm ready.
All right. A Yaklol or a Zoctoil?
Dude.
You should know this one.
How was I supposed to, what do you mean I'm supposed to know this one? What?
All right, a Yaklol or a Zoctoil?
Yaklol?
That is correct.
Oh, jeez.
So the reason that you'll know in a second why you should recognize this. So a Yaklol is a type of demon. They're also known as the handmaidens of Lolth.
Oh, interesting.
Remember we were talking the other day about how Lolth is a demon prince?
Yeah. Well,
and I sent you the description of one of these monsters, the Yaklol, because they are like her demons.
I mean, I sure as fuck didn't remember the name, but yeah, I remember Lolth for sure.
Yeah, so Yaklol resembles a 6 to 7 foot tall yellow ooze that seems to be constantly melting and piling back up like a sickening living candle. They have 8 powerful tentacles and 1 red eye. And those are from AD&D all the way to 5th edition. They've been in every edition of the game.
Ooh. Those sound grody. I mean, cool,
Yeah.
but oof.
Yeah, they're kind of powerful too. All right, so the next one. A rapscallion or a ragamuffin?
I swear I've heard of ragamuffin somewhere. I think I'm going to go with ragamuffin.
That is correct. Damn, Eric, you're on fire. All right, so a ragamuffin is a construct of unknown origins, and it's composed of animated scraps of cloth or other refuse that make a vaguely humanoid form. So they basically look like a scarecrow without the straw inside.
You know, you could have gone with like a Raggedy Ann or something cute and not a fucking scarecrow, but yeah, of course it's a scarecrow.
Yes, and well, here's the thing: in combat, They are known to envelop their victims' bodies and attempt to magically mind control or dominate them and use the victims' bodies to further their own sort of mysterious schemes.
Ooh, that's horrifying.
Yeah, so they consume your body with the clothes, right? So the pants put themselves on you and the shirt puts on you and the helmet goes on you, or whatever. And then they try to mind control you to do what they want. Ragamuffin. That comes to us from AD&D 2nd edition and 3rd edition.
Now I'm wondering where I've heard of this fucking thing, because but no, very, very cool, and something I might have to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the last question. A wolf in sheep's clothing or a gorble?
A gorble?
That's your guess?
Yeah, I'm going with gorble.
So you would be surprised to know that actually both are correct. It was a trick question.
A wolf in sheep's... That's the actual name?
Baby, wait till you fucking see this thing, Eric. Eric, I need you to right now Google wolf in sheep's clothing D&D. Now, I'm going to do my best to describe this thing, but it is a wild-ass monster. So, a wolf in sheep's clothing is a plant-type monster that resembles a stump of an old tree trunk. It has a vertical maw of jagged teeth and 10 to 15 foot long eye stalks that resemble vines or twigs. It usually sprouts a growth on top of the stump that resembles some small furry creature like a rabbit or a squirrel. Bigger ones can have larger growths that resemble pixies or small children. This is meant to lure prey to it.
What the actual... I mean, this is awesome. Don't get me wrong. But what the fuck? Yeah, there's a squirrel.
Those come to us from just AD&D. They did not make it past the 1st edition of the game.
I am shocked that they didn't, because this would be a fucking amazing forest encounter. Like, this
Absolutely.
Is awesome.
Yep, so a wolf in sheep's clothing. But now your guess, which is a gorble. So a gorble is an odd red globe of slimy and rubbery material, believed to be distantly related to a beholder. They are small in size and have 6 tiny red eyes on short, retractable eye stalks and walk on a pair of stubby, clawed legs. They typically were resilient to being harmed by blunt force. They attacked by attempting to latch onto the backs of their opponents with their stubby legs and would maintain this hold until their victims were dead.
They kind of look like fucked up beholders.
Yeah, they're like little leggy beholder, and they're tiny. They're tiny little things, and they come to us from AD&D and 2nd edition.
They're I mean, horrifying, but kind of cute. Cuter than a beholder, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. So that is Monster Mash. What did you? I mean, you did fucking incredible. You got every one of them right.
Pure dumb luck on most of them.
It's a 50-50 chance.
A very good showcase on the
strange
breadth and the insanity of monster design there have been over the years.
Absolutely.
I love it. It's just crazy.
The wolf in sheep's clothing just takes the cake, dude. That thing is so weird looking.
And everybody just thinks of goblins and beholders when they think of D&D. It's such a shame.
I know. That was it. We did our episode. That was this episode of the Plane Hoppers Guild.
Yeah, I've learned a lot. I hope our viewers have learned even more.
We're gonna end this episode with a tip from the Plane Hoppers Guild Handbook. Plane Hoppers Guild Handbook tip number 234. Do not jump into the portal unless you are 100% convinced it will not disintegrate you. That was
Fantastic.
It, guys. Have a good night. Bye.
Safe travels.
Safe travels, adventurers.
Thank you for joining the Plane Hoppers Guild.